Now, you may be asking yourself, why on earth I am doing a review of a video game that released over 14 months ago? And the answer to that is very simple. I wanted to give you the honest gamer's review of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and by that I mean I totally rage quit and quit playing for about 4 months, and then had to go through and grind and relearn the game before finally getting good enough to actually beat it. So I guess that qualifies me to tell you what I really think. Today, I want to talk about Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous from the perspective of a storyteller and give some insight into why this is one of my favorite video games that I've ever played on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who is going to create controversy early in this video by saying I really couldn't bring myself to use Ember during most of my Wrath of the Righteous playthrough. Sorry, I just couldn't do it. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and today welcome to a special side conversation of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous by Owlcat Games. This is a video game that was released in September of 2021 that was based on the adventure path Wrath of the Righteous for Pathfinder 1st Edition. Now, I never got to play the actual adventure path as published by Paizo, but I was always interested in that adventure path, and when I heard that Owlcat was going to be making another Pathfinder game and that was the story they were going for, I was super excited. And I was pretty quick to jump on the Kickstarter for that game because it was definitely something I knew I wanted to experience. So recently, I actually completed my first full official playthrough of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and today I wanted to take some time and talk about Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous from a storyteller's perspective, because from a storytelling perspective, this is easily one of the 10 best video games I have ever played. Now, there are a few things I want to say up front. First off, since I'm going to be reviewing Wrath of the Righteous and I'm going to be doing it from a storyteller's perspective, there will be spoilers in this video, and if you are concerned about spoilers, I would hold off on watching this video. In particular, there's going to be a spoiler from Act 3 of Wrath of the Righteous that I think is central to really appreciating this game. And if you have not played through at least Act 3, I would hold off on watching this video because, to be honest, there is a scene in Act 3 of Wrath of the Righteous that I think is the core of this game, and I do not want to spoil that moment for you. So just be aware there will be some spoilers in this video. Many of the other spoilers will be relatively light, but that one particular item I think is significant enough that you might want to hold off on it. The second thing that I want to say is Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is a very mature adventure path, and Owlcat's take on the story is a very mature game. I actually tried to do some videos playing through Wrath of the Righteous, and ultimately I decided to end those videos because I realized just how mature some of the content in that game is. Now, I know most of the people who are watching this channel probably do not have any issue with mature content in a game, but as a general rule, I try to keep the content on this channel very family friendly, and for that reason, I was hesitant about actually playing through the game because I realized a lot of that content is very heavy. For example, there are scenes in the game that deal with issues like child abuse and neglect. That's not an easy topic to discuss, and if you're not comfortable discussing those issues or seeing those issues portrayed, then this is probably not a game that you need to play. And to that effect, if you're a parent who is considering letting your child play this game, I would advise against it even if your child is a teenager. I do like this game, and I do think it is well done, but a lot of the topics are just very heavy, and if someone is not prepared for those topics and mature enough to interact with those topics, then this game could be a bad experience for them. So take the mature content label seriously on this game. The last thing I want to say is, this is a Storytellers review. I'm going to be talking about this game through the lens of a storyteller and what I think we can learn about storytelling from this game. And to that effect, if you're looking for information on how to play the game, best builds, what different classes do, what different mythic paths do, that's not the information you can find in this video. I will say, if you are looking for some good content on that aspect of gameplay, I would recommend Mortismal Gaming, Slandered Gaming, or CRPG Bro. They do some fantastic videos, and I've watched a lot of their content on the how to play aspects of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. You can learn a lot from those channels. As I have never played the published adventure path from Paizo, I do not have enough knowledge of the story to distinguish between what Paizo originally wrote for Wrath of the Righteous and Alcat's interpretation of Wrath of the Righteous. So as I am going through this video, please understand that both Paizo and Alcat deserve credit for what I think is some fantastic examples of writing, but I don't have the depth of knowledge necessary to distinguish and say, in this particular instance, Paizo gets the credit, in that particular instance, Alcat gets the credit. Honestly, you can feel the influence of both of these authors in the final product, and I think they both deserve credit here. Of course, before we dive into the review itself, I do have to get all of that YouTube stuff out of the way, so if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, subscribe. You can check out my free Discord or my Patreon. Both of those will be linked in the video description. And as always, the best thing you can do is jump down into the comments section and share your thoughts, your ideas, your observations. I love to hear what you have to say. Alright, let's get started. I love the art of storytelling. It's the reason that TTRPGs are my favorite hobby in general. I love playing Pathfinder and Starfinder and D&D and Call of Cthulhu. I love pen and paper RPGs because I love the art and process of storytelling. And I'm sure it would not surprise the viewers of this channel to know that I also have an appreciation for storytelling in other mediums, in other arts, what have you. Just the art of storytelling itself, whether it is books, movies, or pen and paper RPGs, it is something I truly love exploring and learning about. To that effect, I spend a lot of time absorbing different media, observing the different tactics, techniques, and tricks that they use to tell their stories. Now, some of this I do out of personal curiosity, but also sometimes I'm doing it because I'm trying to improve my talents as a storyteller, and in particular relevance to this channel, my talents as a storyteller of pen and paper RPGs. You want to be looking for new ways to present or modify your story to help provide an interesting experience for your players, and an easy way to do that is to study other stories around you. You can find inspiration in books, in movies, or in other media such as comic books, but you can actually step beyond those and find inspiration in other places as well. One of the things that I love to do is I love to study history, because you can get so many fantastic ideas for characters just by studying different historical figures from all around the world. But there is probably one source of inspiration for TTRPG storytellers that is the most common and the most obvious, and that is video games. I imagine a lot of storytellers have pulled a lot of inspiration from some of their favorite video games. Assassin's Creed, Final Fantasy. Heaven knows Skyrim has probably inspired dozens upon dozens of player characters over the years. The overlap between video games and pen and paper RPGs is very obvious to fans of both hobbies. And so, when Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous launched, it was actually very interesting to me because I had never had a chance to explore the adventure path, but I was interested in it, and now I was going to get to see a tabletop RPG translated into a video game, and I was going to get to kind of jump in from the very beginning. I was very excited to see how Owlcat chose to tell that story and to see what I might be able to learn about telling similar stories at the gaming table. To that effect, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is a fantastic game. And while I'm not the kind of person who spends a lot of time ranking video games, it's not a big hobby for me, I would say pretty comfortably that Wrath of the Righteous is a top 10 video game for me, and probably top 5. I'd have to sit down and think pretty hard, but this is definitely a game that has engaged me a lot more than other video games have, and there is a very, very clear reason why. Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is a masterclass in the use of theme in storytelling. Seriously, if you're interested in the art of storytelling and you want to know how to use theme well in a tabletop RPG, in a video that you're making, whatever it may be, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is a fantastic example of exactly how to do so, and I would argue that this may be the best use of theme in a video game that has ever been done. I hope I'm not being hyperbolic here. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments if you'd like to. But it is at this point that I should go ahead and tell you the spoilers are going to start here. So if you are afraid of spoilers, I would encourage you, go ahead and stop the video now. You can pretty safely watch this video if you've gone on to Act 4 of Wrath of the Righteous, but if you haven't gotten that far in the story yet, the spoilers start now. Okay, so in Wrath of the Righteous, Act 3, towards the end of the act, your character will get into a conversation with one of the major villains of Wrath of the Righteous. And it's in this conversation that Owlcat Games does something rather impressive. Owlcat Games has an item known as the 2x4 of subtle theme emphasis. You may not have heard of such an incredible item, but here's how it works. Owlcat Games, during that conversation, lovingly and carefully inscribes the theme of the entire video game into this 2x4. And once they have so very neatly inscribed it, they take that 2x4, reach through your computer screen, and proceed to thwack you across the face so hard you cannot miss the theme no matter how hard you try. Seriously, it is not a subtle moment. Owlcat gives you the theme of the game straight up. It's almost like the character is talking to you, the player of the game, not the PC that is the main character of the video game. In this conversation, this villain basically says, "This is all about change." In that moment, the villain tells you that the theme of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is the concept of change. What is change? What brings change? What does change mean? They introduce this huge theme of change and ask you as a player to consider what that word means and what that word embodies in terms of storytelling. In a way, the moment is kind of shocking. I'm not joking when I say I felt like Owlcat had slapped me across the face and said, "Pay attention, this is what our game is about." But it was also kind of refreshing because Owlcat times that revelation perfectly inside of the story. It occurs just a little past the midpoint of the game, and I think the timing is perfectly done because you are far enough into the game that the revelation of the theme of the game can be applied to what you've already done, and you won't have forgotten that part of the story, but you also have that knowledge going forward, and it begins to color every single interaction that you have. Now, I know this may sound dramatic, but if you have played Wrath of the Righteous, stop for a moment and think about different aspects of this game, and you will realize that change is the driving force of this story. Mythic power, the major mechanic that was added to this game over the game Kingmaker, mythic power is all about your character changing from whatever you start as to some other incredible creature with the power to reshape the world. Do you change into an angel or a demon or a dragon? The choice is up to you, but that core mechanic is all about your character literally changing what you are on a fundamental level. And then you start thinking about all of the characters that you have met over the course of the story. I'm not going to dive into every single character inside of Wrath of the Righteous because there are a ton of characters here, but if you stop and think, all of them embody the concept of change in one fashion or another. Let's start with a simple example. Seelah, my favorite example of a paladin that is well written in any media. A lot of paladins are poorly written, but I love how Paizo has written Seelah and how Alcat portrays her. Seelah is a character who started off life as a poor thief inside of a city. And though you are sympathetic to her circumstances, if you read her story, you recognize that her behavior as a thief directly leads to the death of another person. And Seelah, recognizing the consequences of her actions, makes a bold but deliberate choice to change who she is. And so she leaves that life of thievery to become a paladin. And Seelah is, in short, fantastically written, if you ask me, because you see this character who understands the rough backgrounds that other people might come from, but at the same time has achieved the sort of discipline that allows her to be successful in what she does. And you see the sympathy she has for others, but also you understand that motivation, that drive she has to change who she is, to live a different way because of the regret she carries from the mistakes she made when she was young. Seelah, in her simple backstory, embodies the idea of change. Every character in the game is a discussion of change, but these discussions of change come from very different angles. Take a look at the character of Ember. Now, I'm not going to dive into it. In some ways, I love the character of Ember, but ultimately, Ember was a character that I couldn't bring myself to use while I was playing the game. The childish nature of the character just didn't feel right for me as I was trying to play through this war against the forces of the Abyss. It didn't feel right, okay? But Ember is the embodiment of this almost pure and innocent mindset that anyone can change for the better. That's her entire personality. That is her entire philosophy. She is willing to march into a palace of a demon queen and preach kindness and love to the demon queen because she believes that maybe that demon queen, if someone gives them a chance, they'll change. And that is the core of her character, the idea, I'm going to give people a chance to be better. On the flip side of this narrative, you have a character like Regill, the gnomish Hell Knight. Inside of the Pathfinder setting, the Hell Knights are dedicated to law and order, and they are violently opposed to chaos and, as a result, change. In fact, the Hell Knights battle against the Abyss because they don't want to see the kind of chaotic change that the Abyss would bring to Golarion. The Hell Knights, as an order, represent the portion of society that is reluctant to change, that is afraid of change, that will even violently crush change if they feel it is necessary. In fact, Regill is an interesting case because as a gnome, he suffers from the bleaching. New experiences are as fundamental to his health and well-being as food and water. But because he is so opposed to the idea of change, he is literally killing his own body to prevent change from happening. You can see in the character of Regill this thematic portrayal of people who are so resistant to change that they end up damaging, even destroying themselves. But let's get controversial. One of the most hated characters in Wrath of the Righteous is Queen Galfrey. And I won't go into all of the reasons that people dislike her, but if you see some of the commentary out there on the internet, she catches a lot of flack. But she's also in the story for a deliberate reason. Queen Galfrey represents the people who try to change, but ultimately fail to do so. You don't realize it when you're playing through Act 1 and 2 of Wrath of the Righteous, but in the early portion of the game, Queen Galfrey is making a massive change to how the crusade is managed in promoting your character to commander and giving you so much leeway to try to change the course of battle. Queen Galfrey is trying to change what she has been doing because she knows that it's necessary to win the war. But as the story progresses, she struggles with that change and ultimately fails to embrace it, leading her to make a very destructive decision inside the story and causing a lot of people to really hate her character. And I'm not going to lie, that moment inside the game is pretty drastic. It hits hard. But that moment with Queen Galfrey occurs not long after this conversation about change, and I remember watching that scene and thinking, this is the character who's trying to change but just can't do it. That's what she represents. That conversation with the villain in Act 3 makes you rethink everything you've done in Acts 1, Act 2, and even the early part of Act 3. Everything up until that point is suddenly being seen through a different lens because you've been told, hey, this is what the story is all about. But then you go forward from that point on into Act 4, Act 5, Act 6, and now you're experiencing the game and making choices and seeing all of these things through the lens of this story is about change. I do not think it is accidental that you have this conversation towards the end of Act 3 where they tell you the theme is change. And then in Act 4, you go to Nocticula's realm in the Abyss, and the environment there literally changes as you're traveling around her city. You turn the camera one way, and this building rises. You turn the camera the other way, and this bridge suddenly appears on the screen. Manipulating the way you even look at the environment suddenly changes which path you have open to you. That's not just cool artwork, that is a thematic choice. Changes the theme so much so that the very world you walk on is going to change just based on how you look at it. From a big picture perspective, in Act 3, you have this very grand scale that your character is operating on, and then you go to Act 4, where you and your party are working your way through Nocticula City, and it kind of zeroes in the lens of the story, the focus of the story, but it's deliberate. We're talking about change, we've changed your perspective, we're changing how you look at the environment, and then as you move through the rest of the story, suddenly in Act 4 the environment is changing. In Act 5, suddenly you're making policy decisions for how the realm of Sarkoris is going to look after the crusade is over. Like, that's actually something you have to do towards the end of the game. Once you get to the point where it's like, okay, the last few battles are coming, we know what direction this war is heading, now you have to start making economic and military and policy decisions about what the country is going to look like when the war is over. You are changing the world around you in a way that is going to extend beyond just a few battles or just a few fights with demons. And I guess I should say this last little piece here is also a bit of a spoiler, but the last scene of the game literally gives your character an opportunity to change the decision a deity makes. I won't tell you what the decision is or how you can affect that decision, but you get to play around with the will of the gods. Can your character change what a deity is going to do? At every single point in this game, Alcat is telling a story, but that story is about something. It is about the concept of change. In fact, earlier you may remember that I mentioned there is definitely a mature content warning when it comes to Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I don't think I will ever be able to do an evil run-through of Wrath of the Righteous because a lot of the content in this game is very heavy, but the interesting thing is, though this content hit hard, this is the first time I've seen a mature game that I actually thought was mature. Like, they handled the content intelligently and well, and in a way that fit what the story was doing. Yes, you're dealing with some heavy stuff, but it's not just there for the shock value. But instead, you get the sense that there is a narrative purpose behind what Alcat is choosing to do. Because you understand the theme of the story, it makes you consider the larger implications of your actions, and it makes certain elements inside of the story hit in a way that I don't think they would hit if that hadn't been highlighted the way that it was in Act 3 of this game. So that brings me to a question. What can storytellers learn from playing Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous? And if you can't tell here, the big takeaway is theme can be very powerful. Picking a theme and using that theme in a deliberate, specific way is going to enhance a story. It's going to tie a story together in a way that goes beyond just the plot beats of whatever happens inside of the game. Elements that seem very disparate, elements that seem like they shouldn't fit together, can fit together if you weave them together with that thematic narrative thread that you have chosen. And as a storyteller, you want to think not just about the plot of your story, what's going to happen at point A, point B, point C, but you also want to think about the narrative purpose of the various things that you've chosen to include. Another thing we can learn here is when and how to emphasize theme. I think that Alcat's placement of the theme in Wrath of the Righteous is perfectly done, at least for this game. By dropping it just after the midpoint of the story, they place it neatly between two chunks of the game so that you both get a chance to reflect on things that you've already done, and it also can influence things that are yet to come. If the theme had dropped too early, I feel like it would have missed some of its impact, and if it had dropped too late, I feel like you would struggle to understand different things that you had done previously, even if there was a clear tie to the theme that Alcat was giving you. Alcat chose the placement of that conversation and that discussion of theme very carefully so that it would highlight everything else that they chose to do inside of the game, and that, I think, is something that storytellers should definitely take note of. And finally, to revisit this concept just one more time, good use of theme can make otherwise difficult stories far more engaging. Normally, I don't enjoy games that have really heavy mature content. That's just not my style of media. For example, I don't normally want to read stories about child abuse. I know it's real, and honestly, I work with it in my day job sometimes. But, that's not something that I want to read about when I'm playing a game to relax. Mature content is not something I normally engage with, but in this case, because Alcat uses its mature content in a way that supports the theme, it's more engaging than it would have been. Content that could have been off-putting ends up being engaging because it uses the theme and uses it well. A lot of people use mature content as the literary equivalent of Jerry Springer, and honestly it doesn't stay entertaining for very long, but when you use stuff deliberately and well, it can actually transform that content and make it more impactful and more digestible. But what do you think? The time has come for me to turn this conversation over to you. Have you played through Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and what do you think of its story? Do you agree with me that Wrath of the Righteous makes fantastic use of the element of theme in storytelling? And what other storytelling elements do you think that Paizo or Alcat did really well? Please jump down into the comments section and let me know your thoughts. And if you disagree with my assessment, feel free to let me know why as well. I love to hear what you all have to say. Don't forget all the other YouTube stuff. Like, share, subscribe. Check out my Discord, my Patreon. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.